Welcome to the deep dive. If you're tuning in, you probably share that, constant itch to get to the core of complex AI research without just, well, drowning in the information overload.
Oh, absolutely. There's just so much noise out there right now.
There totally is. You want to know what actually matters, how it works, and why it changes the landscape. So today, we are targeting a major bottleneck in generative AI. And to set it up, I want you to imagine a fresh medical school graduate on their very first day of residency.
Okay, fresh out of the classroom, textbook in hand.
Exactly. Standing right next to a veteran attending physician with like 20 years on the hospital floor. Now, if you give them both a static multiple choice medical exam, the fresh grad might actually score higher.
Right, because they've just spent years optimizing for those exact textbooks. They're, built for that test.
Yeah, but put them both in an emergency room with a patient whose symptoms are entirely contradictory, where the lab results are messy and the clinical picture is just, changing by the minute.
Well, the veteran has an insurmountable advantage in that scenario. I mean, they aren't relying solely on factual recall. They're relying on procedural intuition
Yeah.
built from thousands of messy interactions.
Which brings us directly to our source material today. We're exploring a state-of-the-art research paper titled Experience Makes Skillful Enabling Generalizable Medical Agent Reasoning via Self-Evolving Skill Memory.
Yeah, and the researchers call this framework SkeMex for short.
SkeMex, right. The central mission here is figuring out how we can give AI agents that veteran on-the-ground experience. Because currently, medical large language models like DeepSeek v3.2 or Qwen 3.6 Plus, they're essentially that fresh medical grad.
They really are. I mean, they
They're-
completely dominate static single-turn benchmarks like MedQA.
Right.
But they do, and that kind of creates a false sense of security regarding their actual clinical readiness. Because real-world medical decision-making unfolds over multiple steps.
It's not just one question and one answer.
Exactly. A physician gathers evidence, forms a hypothesis, maybe orders a lab test, and then, and this is crucial, must actively revise that hypothesis when the test comes back with unexpected results.
Which happens all the time in the real world.
All the time. And current AI agents are notoriously brittle when forced into this kind of long horizon clinical reasoning. They just lack the ability to, adjust their actions under uncertainty.
Let's diagnose why that is, because attempts to give AI experience aren't exactly new. My initial thought would be to just feed the AI a database of its past patient interactions. Like if it encounters a complex case of lupus, just give it access to the case logs of the last 50 lupus patients it treated.
Sure, yeah. That is the premise of case-based reasoning, which was the standard early approach. You essentially dump the raw transcripts of past patient trajectories right into the model's memory.
Like through a RG pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. Retrieval augmented generation. But you run into a really severe signal-to-noise problem. A patient trajectory isn't a neat summary. It is a massive, noisy transcript filled with back-and-forth dialogue, irrelevant lab values, corrected mistakes, minor observations.
So the AI just gets completely bogged down. I imagine if you query a vector database with a new patient's symptoms and it pulls up a 1,000-page raw transcript from a past case, the model is going to overfit.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to overfit its response to the highly specific, totally irrelevant details of that historical patient rather than extracting the core medical procedure.
It becomes hopelessly instance-specific. The model tries to pattern match the noise rather than generalizing the underlying principle.
Okay, so if raw memory retrieval is too messy, the other obvious lever is retraining. I mean, why not just take those hard-learned lessons and update the underlying parameters of the neural network?
Well, updating the model weights through continuous fine-tuning is computationally exorbitant. But more critically, you introduce the risk of catastrophic forgetting.
Wait, really? Catastrophic forgetting?
Yeah. When you adjust the weights of a neural network via gradient descent to accommodate a highly specific new diagnostic pathway, you are fundamentally altering the mathematical balance of the entire model.
Wait, so if we teach the AI a new trick by changing its weights, it might spontaneously forget how to treat a basic cold.
That is exactly the risk.
Wow. That seems incredibly risky in a hospital setting. I would argue that's akin to performing open brain surgery on a doctor every time they learn a new fact. You might successfully wire in a brilliant new protocol for treating a rare autoimmune disease, but in the process, you alter the weight distributions that govern basic antibiotic prescriptions.
Right. You risk the model spontaneously forgetting how to treat a basic staph infection. In a domain where reliability is literally a matter of life and death, you cannot tolerate that kind of regression.
So it's like a dual trap.
It is, as the dual trap researchers have been stuck in. Raw memory retrieval is like keeping every single crumpled tissue, sticky note, and printed lab result from every past patient in your pocket. It's unsearchable chaos.
Right. And continuous fine-tuning risks to storing foundational knowledge.
Exactly.
Well, that sets the stage perfectly for the SkeMex solution, because the researchers designed a post-deployment self-evolution framework that uses a skill-based memory. And the critical mechanism here is that it manages to learn and adapt without ever updating the model weights.
Right. They bypass the brain surgery entirely by relying on what they call experience distillation.
Experience distillation.
Yeah. SkeMex doesn't save the messy trajectory. Instead, it uses an LLM to observe a complex, multi-turn interaction with a patient and distills that interaction into a compact, reusable skill.
Let's define what a skill actually is in this architecture, because it's not just a factual statement like the capital of France is Paris. It encodes procedural knowledge, right?
Right. A skill in the SkeMex framework is structured procedural guidance. It essentially maps a specific clinical context to a recommended action or reasoning strategy. It extracts the how to act from the noise of the raw experience.
But even if you are distilling these experiences into clean procedural skills, if an AI treats 10,000 patients, you're going to end up with 10,000 skills.
Oh, easily.
And if you just throw them all into a flat vector database, you are right back to a retrieval nightmare.
Yes, to solve the retrieval scaling issue, the researchers engineered a highly structured, three-tiered repository. They basically categorized procedural knowledge into three distinct branches based on abstraction level.
I want to walk through how this architecture functions, because splitting up the abstractions seems to be the secret sauce here. The top level is the general branch, right?
Yes, the general branch stores broad reasoning strategies and overarching clinical principles. These are highly transferable heuristics that apply across almost any medical domain.
Give me an example of that.
So, for instance, a skill here might dictate that a practitioner must always cross-reference newly prescribed medications against a patient's existing allergy profile before finalizing a treatment plan.
Okay, so it's the broad philosophy of care. But you can't treat a patient on phylactery alone. You need clinical specifics, which leads to the task level branch.
Exactly. The task level branch is context dependent. It captures procedural patterns tied to specific clinical categories. So you might have a distinct skill optimized for forming a differential diagnosis in respiratory cases or a specific protocol for interpreting anomalous metabolic panels.
And finally, you have the action level branch, which deals with the mechanical execution, because modern AI agents are interacting with digital tools, right?
Right, they have to query electronic health record systems, maybe format digital prescriptions, or call up imaging databases.
Right.
So this branch records the operational knowledge of how to format a complex parameter to query a database without, triggering a syntax error.
So broad principles, specific tasks, and actual tool operation.
Exactly. And the necessity of this three-tiered structure isn't just theoretical. The researchers conducted extensive ablation studies. When they stripped away the task-level branch, leaving only the broad general principles and the mechanical action rules, the system's overall performance dropped by an average of 4.57 points across benchmarks.
Wow, a near 5-point drop is substantial. I mean, it proves the AI fundamentally requires that middle layer of specific medical context to function.
It really does.
You can't just hand an AI a list of ethical principles and a manual on how to use a keyboard and expect it to diagnose a complex illness. It needs clinical nuance.
Yeah, that architecture forms the stack library. But, a library is only as good as the system managing it. The core innovation of the SkeMex paper is the closed-loop engine that actually runs this repository day to day.
The actual life cycle of it.
Right. It consists of 4 continuous phases: read, write, assess, and govern.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of the read phase first. When a new patient case begins, the AI needs to pull relevant skills from the repository. But it's not just doing a standard semantic similarity search, which is what most RAG pipelines do. It uses what they term value-aware retrieval.
Yeah, semantic match is really only the first filter. It evaluates whether the text of the skill aligns with the text of the patient's chart. But SkeMex also factors in historical utility and, incredibly, memory strength.
Yeah, the memory strength variable is what caught my attention. They actively incorporate the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which is a psychological model of human memory decay, into the retrieval mathematics.
It is a brilliant adaptation. In human psychology, the Ebbinghaus curve models how information is lost over time when there's no attempt to retain it.
Right.
In SkeMex, the researchers apply an exponential decay function to a skills retrieval score. If a skill has been recently reinforced or successfully used, its strength remains high, pulling it to the top of the retrieval stack.
Oh.
But if a skill is outdated or rarely validated in practice, its vector weight decays over time.
That mirrors human clinical intuition perfectly. If you haven't used a highly specific diagnostic pathway for 5 years, it's not going to be the first thing that jumps to mind when you walk into a room.
Exactly.
But the protocol you successfully used yesterday is readily available. It forces the AI to rely on fresh, actively proven tactics.
Exactly. Now, once the AI pulls these skills and navigates the patient case, we enter the right phase. This is the distillation process we discussed earlier, but with a highly aggressive filtering mechanism.
Wait, I would assume the AI learns from every single interaction. Like, why wouldn't it?
You'd think so, but it intentionally does not. The system is designed to actively discard trivial successes and mechanical repetitions.
It throws them away.
Yeah, if the AI agent correctly diagnoses a routine case of seasonal allergies using standard procedures, it throws the entire trajectory away. It only retains informative trajectories, which heavily biases the system toward retaining informative failures.
That makes perfect sense, actually. If you think about how expertise is actually built, we learn very little from confirming what we already know. It's like the AI knows it learns more from a complex misdiagnosis than it does from correctly identifying a basic scraped knee for the 100th time. The most valuable data comes from expectation violation.
That is exactly the case. When the AI uses an established skill, makes a misdiagnosis, and later receives feedback revealing the true cause, that entire multi-turn trajectory is captured.
Oh, interesting.
The LLM analyzes the transcript, locates the specific juncture where the reasoning diverged from the correct path, and extracts that failure pattern to write a draft of a new skill designed to prevent that specific error.
It effectively runs its own internal morbidity and mortality conference.
Pretty much.
But writing a draft of a skill is just proposing a hypothesis, right? The AI might deduce that it needs to order an MRI for a specific set of symptoms, but that new rule might be overly cautious or financially wasteful in practice. So how does the system verify that the newly written post-it note is actually helpful?
This requires a highly quantitative evaluation, which takes place in the assess phase through utility-driven valuation. Every skill is tracked against a baseline.
Okay, how does that work?
Let's say the base LLM, without using any retrieve skills, has an 80% success rate on a specific subset of diagnostic tasks. The system deploys the newly drafted skill in similar scenarios and measures the delta.
The relative advantage?
Yes. If using the skill pushes the success rate on those tasks to 85%, the skill exhibits a positive relative advantage. The mathematical utility score of that specific skill increases, solidifying its place in the repository.
But the flip side of that is far more critical, I think. What if the new skill introduces a bias? What if it causes the model to start misdiagnosing cases it previously handled correctly?
If the relative advantage goes negative, the system applies a penalty. The researchers implemented a risk-sensitive regularizer into the formula.
A risk-sensitive regularizer.
Yeah, which means that if a skill causes harmful adoption, leading the AI down an incorrect clinical pathway, its utility score is actively slashed. Furthermore, the higher a skill's previously established utility, the harsher the penalty if it suddenly begins causing errors.
I really want to emphasize the importance of this mathematical baseline correction because looking at the ablation studies again, when the researchers disabled this specific assessment mechanism, the system's performance completely collapsed. On the live MedBench dataset, the accuracy dropped by up to 7%.
Yeah, without the ability to evaluate relative advantage, an AI is essentially blind to its own efficacy. It cannot differentiate between a genuinely brilliant clinical insight and a flawed heuristic that just happened to be applied to a trivially easy case.
Right. It would be like a doctor adopting a superstitious routine because a patient happened to recover on their own and having absolutely no statistical mechanism to realize the routine is useless. So the AI absolutely must have a mechanism to judge the quality of its own experience against an objective mathematical baseline, or it will just confidently accumulate bad habits.
Which brings us to the necessity of the final phase govern. You have a system continuously writing new hypotheses and scoring them. Over time, that repository is going to bloat. SkeMex acts as a continuous database administrator. Every few learning epochs, it sweeps the repository. It identifies skill vectors that are highly similar and merges them to reduce redundancy.
It promotes skills with consistently high utility scores to a mature status, and ruthlessly deprecates or archives skills whose utility scores have dropped below a functional threshold. It ensures the vector space remains lean and highly optimized.
The theoretical architecture is incredibly elegant, but the true test of any medical AI framework is empirical validation.
Let's talk about the trials.
Yeah, the researchers deployed SkeMex across 9 different rigorous medical benchmarks, including datasets like Agent Clinic, LiveClin, and MedJourney. These require deep, multi-step clinical interaction. And they tested the framework on major open-source backbones, primarily DeepSeek v3.2 and Qwen 3.6+.
The distinction between the offline and online testing modes in the paper is where the results get really illuminating, I think.
Definitely. In the offline mode, the researchers took a training dataset, allowed the system to build a static skill repository, froze that repository, and then evaluated the AI on entirely unseen patient cases.
And how did it do?
When the base DeepSeek React agent was augmented with this frozen SkeMex repository, its performance leaped from 48.2% to 56.08%.
Wow. That is a massive capability jump achieved purely by giving the model an optimized external memory without altering a single internal weight.
Yeah, but the true indicator of generalization was the out-of-domain performance. On the Agent Clinic text benchmark, which belonged to a completely different dataset family than the training data, SkeMex improved performance by 34.11 points over the baseline.
A 34-point jump on out-of-domain data is incredible. It suggests the distillation process is successfully decoupling the underlying medical logic from the surface-level patient symptoms. I mean, it isn't just memorizing specific cases, it is genuinely extracting transferable clinical reasoning.
But the offline mode is still static, right? The online mode tests the framework in a continuous learning environment, which really mimics real-world clinical deployment. In this mode, the repository is not frozen. As the AI tackles a streaming sequence of clinical tasks, it continuously runs the read-write-assess governed loop.
So it's learning on the fly.
Exactly. It writes new skills, updates utility scores, and prunes the database on the fly.
This is kind of the holy grail of AI deployment, a model that just gets better the longer you leave it running.
Yeah, and in the online setting, SkeMex demonstrated stable, continuous improvement. From the first epoch of testing to the third, its overall performance steadily climbed from 76.39% to 78.56%.
On its face, a 2-point climb might not sound revolutionary until you look at the performance graphs of the competing memory baselines.
Right, because several of the competing frameworks actually suffered performance regressions over time. As they continually added raw memory to their systems, their databases became cluttered with noise and conflicting information.
We got bogged down again.
Yeah, they essentially induced their own form of catastrophic forgetting through vector bloat. SkeMex was the only framework that reliably trended upward, validating that its aggressive filtering and utility governance actively prevent memory degradation.
Let's synthesize what this means for the broader landscape of generative AI. We started with the foundational problem of current LLMs. They are brilliant at test-taking, but incredibly fragile in dynamic environments. Relying on raw vector memory introduces paralyzing noise, and retraining the core parameters risks destroying foundational knowledge.
Right, and the SkeMex framework provides a viable bridge. By taking raw patient trajectories and using an LLM to distill them into structured procedural skills, and then categorizing those skills across general, task, and action-level branches, you create a highly searchable external brain.
And by implementing the continuous life cycle of reading with Ebbinghaus decay, writing only from expectation violations, assessing via mathematical relative advantage, and aggressively governing the database, the AI essentially functions as its own mentor.
That's a great way to put it.
It can safely accumulate and refine clinical intuition hour by hour without ever undergoing the risks of model fine-tuning.
The implications extend far beyond the medical field, too. I mean, the fundamental process here, distilling noisy experiences into compact, reusable heuristics, rigorously evaluating whether they actually provide a measurable advantage over your baseline, and discarding the habits that fail that test, is the universal mechanics of expertise. It applies just as much to human learning as it does to artificial agents.
That structural view of learning is really profound, which leaves us with a final concept for you to consider. We began by comparing these AI models to a fresh medical graduate, reliant entirely on the static knowledge written by veteran human doctors. But if an AI framework can now independently accumulate thousands of clinical experiences a day, well, if it can evaluate its own successes and failures quantitatively, distill its own procedural rules, and refine its own intuition continuously without the limits of human fatigue, at what point does the accumulated artificial experience in that repository surpass the foundational intuitions of the human veterans who generated the original training data?
That is the big question. We are rapidly approaching the threshold where the distilled procedural knowledge of the machine becomes the new textbook for the practitioner.
An entirely new frontier for how expertise is generated. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you on the next one.